Majestic Africa sets the scene for Chris Bohjalian's riveting new thriller about a honeymoon safari that goes horribly wrong. In The Lioness, Bohjalian pulls us into the wild, beautiful, and dangerous world of the Serengeti and reminds us why every book he writes is a bestseller.
As someone once said to me, I always know it's a Chris Bohjalian novel because someone's going to get whacked on page 1. Which isn't actually the case, but I knew what they were getting at.
But Bohjalian's fans also know that he never tells the same story twice. With each new novel or production, he takes his readers into unexpected territory, from the tragic intimacy of Midwives, the 1997 Oprah Book Club pick that made him a star, to the blockbuster success of The Flight Attendant, the dark, comedic thriller that's now a hit series on HBO Max, starring and executive produced by Kaley Cuoco. Since The Flight Attendant debuted during the pandemic shutdown, it was one of the few bright spots from that time. One of the downsides for Bohjalian was the toll that Zoom and online interviews took on his voice, an injury that he's still trying to heal.
I want to talk about the safari joke, elephant in the room. My voice. No, I do not have laryngitis. This is my post-pandemic voice.
Chris Bohjalian, I can't believe it's like sitting next to you.
I can't believe I'm sitting next to you.
I'm such a fan, so I'm sort of, pinching myself. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's so lovely to see everybody back out and about. So thank you so much for coming out. And if you're a Chris fan, we all know the body of work. This is book number 23, The Lioness. And they never disappoint, as we all know. You know, I've heard other interviewers say to you, and it's one of the things that I've always felt as a reader, too, is that your books, every one is like a new gift. And there's the familiarity of knowing you're going to get this great story, but they're each so different and fresh. And The Lioness especially, it's always so unexpected to see what direction you're going to go in for your next story. So tell us about The Lioness. Reviews have been fantastic. Do you still worry about that, or are you past all that?
Oh, I worry about reviews. Absolutely. I am filled with anxiety before a book comes out because I don't want to disappoint my readers and I don't want to write a bad book. So first of all, is Amanda St. Amand in the house tonight? Hey, Mandy. Okay. She reviewed The Lioness for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, and it is one of my favorite reviews. It is so smart and so astute, and she just so gets all of the things that I was trying to do. Even though she's a St. Louis Cardinals fan, and I'm a Mets fan.
You'll forgive her for that.
No, actually, I've been in the elevator with so many Cardinal fans last night, and of course today. So it was a real yin and yang for them after last night and then after today's win. So yes, I do worry about reviews. And to go back to your question, my books are all different by design. I never want to write the same book twice. The Lioness had its origins in August of 2019. I was in New York City because we were workshopping the stage adaptation I'd written of my play, Midwives. And one afternoon, I went to a matinee. And when I emerged from the air-conditioned dark of the theater into the heat of August and these cobalt skies, and we all know that feeling when you emerge from a matinee into the daylight, and I thought to myself, my gosh, I love movies. Why have I never written a Hollywood novel? So I thought I would. But even in 2019, pre-pandemic, how we watch movies was changing. I was the only human being in the matinee. And that wasn't the first time I've been the only human being in a matinee. The era when one movie in a theater could become part of the cultural zeitgeist for all of us was already ending. So I thought to myself, if this is written in the past, when should it be set? What are some of the interesting Hollywood golden ages? And one of them coincides with my childhood. You know, the 1960s and the 1970s. I'm of an age when people my age or a little older, the first movie they ever saw in a theater invariably was Mary Poppins. Dick Van Dyke, Julie Andrews, the Dancing Penguins. Not me. My parents had no filter and clearly no judgment. They took me to whatever movie they wanted to see. So the very first movie I ever saw was Bonnie and Clyde. The first thing I ever saw in a big screen theater was Faye Dunaway naked. And I literally said to my mom, "Why is she wearing no clothes?" My principal memory of that movie. Or, of course, Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway being machine gunned in the Bonnie and Clyde death car for 45 slow motion seconds. There's a reason my books are the way they are.
It all started there.
So I decided to set it in the 1960s. And I've loved, in the last 10 years, writing books set in the United States and overseas. Books like The Flight Attendant and The Red Lotus. And so I thought to myself, where could I bring a group of Hollywood A-listers and put them in jeopardy? And in the 1960s, there's the Cold War. And there are all of these proxy wars. And there's cultural and social transformation, not just in the United States, but in East Africa. So I decided, what would happen if they went on a safari? Now, I got really, really lucky. There was a cancellation of 2 people on the safari I wanted to go on in October of 2019. So I was able to go on the safari in October with my lovely bride and have done that critical homework before the world shut down.
This book is so cinematic. It feels like you're reading a movie, watching a movie. And the characters, too, are all so, have their roles. I know you've said that cinema has always inspired you. In this particular case, during the writing process, I was curious to know how that played out for you as you sat writing and creating.
It's a great question. I don't write hoping that what I'm writing will become a TV series or a movie. But my writing has changed a lot because of cable and now streaming television. The reality is how all of us in this room consume entertainment, books, movies, and TV shows has changed in the last 10 or 12 years because of The Wire, The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and that affected how I write about 10 or 12 years ago because I wanted to write books that have the same instant immersion and emotional intensity of really good TV drama. I mean, I begin my day watching movie and TV series trailers, and that has impacted my work. So a book like The Lioness, it was a really good fit because as someone once said to me, I always know it's a Chris Bohjalian novel because someone's going to get whacked on page 1, which isn't actually the case, but I knew what they were getting at. And in The Lioness, I knew that I was going to take my actors, because the basic premise is this. Hollywood's biggest star in 1964, Katie Barstow, finally gets married and brings her entire entourage with her into the Serengeti, where, not a spoiler because it happens in the first chapter, they are abducted by Russian mercenaries on the way to the Congo. And it's really clear from the beginning that this book is Evelyn Hugo meets Jurassic Park, or the Poisonwood Bible meets And Then There Were None. So in that regard, it felt cinematic to be writing it.
And the thing I loved, you tell us right up front, like, this is not going to go well. But we still want to know why. That's the trick, right?
That is the trick, yeah.
As you mentioned, you sort of steeped yourself in old Hollywood. Which real stars sort of helped inspire some of these characters? I know you've talked a little bit about that in some other interviews, and I found that fascinating.
Katie Barstow is a combination in my mind of Natalie Wood and Elizabeth Taylor. Terence Dutton is clearly a young Sidney Poitier, though Sidney Poitier, of course, has cameos in the book. You know, Terence Dutton really looks up to Sidney Poitier. One of my other favorite characters in the novel is Carmen Tedesco. And Carmen Tedesco is every great female character actor we know from the 1960s and the 1970s. Those really solid actors who crush it in one or two scenes, but they've only got one or two scenes.
It's interesting you say that because you feel that right away. Carmen Tedesco is the character who seems to have a foot in each world. She sees things so clearly from these different perspectives, and she sort of becomes our eyes in the story.
As she says, you know, I do the work. When the camera's red light goes on, I put on my big girl pants and I do my job.
One of the things that I found so interesting, too, is that this juxtaposition of this construct, right, of Hollywood and the dream and the fantasy and the glamour, and then this, and even you say the word safari, and it evokes glamour and a glamorous era, and then what happens completely blows that up.
What would we do when the worst that can happen really happens? And that's the subject of so many great movies and books and plays and TV series. When you know what hits the fan, do you rise to the challenge or do you collapse in the dirt and puke? And some people rise to the challenge and some fall to the dirt and vomit. Somebody said to me, who's more evil in this book, the Russians or the animals? And my immediate response was, the animals aren't evil at all. The animals are just being animals. I mean, they're just being hyenas and leopards and lions. And as for the Russians, the question is, in this book, given the secrets of so many of these characters, who's more evil, the Russians or some of the Americans on the safari?
The other aspect, too, is just the majestic land that they are in. Gorgeous Africa, but also very real, and there's nowhere to hide from the realities of the world.
The thing about the Serengeti, how many of you, has anyone in this room been to the Serengeti? It's remarkable, isn't it? It is utterly life-changing because you understand how small we are as human beings. And the other thing is that if you behave yourself on a safari, it's perfectly safe. The guides know what they're doing. If you don't behave yourself, there are a million ways to die. It's not just the animals that will kill you. There are plants that will kill you. There are 1,000,001 ways to die there. And the guides I had were so much fun. Because once they understood by like day 2 or day 3 that I wasn't a serial killer, I just wanted to know from my research all of the things that could kill me or kill any of us. They were great. And they would tell me stories about idiot guests and how close they had come to seeing guests get eaten. I mean, you know, the guest who, for example, jumped out of the Land Rover because there was a cute little baby leopard frolicking, and there's mom in a tree. Or the guests who were determined to get a nightcap and leave their tent and go to the tent with the booze, and the next morning there were all of the lion tracks, footprints, within 15 feet of their footprints.
One of the things that's so clear in watching your interviews and talking to you is just how much you love the research and just the deep dive into this story that you're crafting. It's contagious, your excitement for it. And it made me imagine that moment when you reached the Serengeti and saw this unfold before you. That had to have been awe-inspiring as a writer and just a human.
It is, and it was. I didn't know what to expect, especially because it's October, and I only had this idea for the book in late August. I had no expectation that 6 or 8 weeks later, I'd be on a safari. I mean, my wife and I assumed it would be at some point in 2020 where we will get to the Serengeti. So I've not written a word. And you fly into Arusha, and then the next morning, you are suddenly in this tiny little plane. There were 8 of us, and we take off, and I felt like I was out of Africa. And Robert Redford is, got the, flying the plane, because all you hear is the single engine, and you leave civilization behind, and suddenly you're looking down at thousands of wildebeest. Suddenly you see nothing but the mountains in the distance, and then you're landing on a grass strip, and there's nothing around you but the grass strip and 2 Land Rovers to drive you to the camp. And it is breathtaking. So I immediately started taking notes, and it was when I returned to the United States that I began to do the deep dive into the history of safaris and into Hollywood in the 1960s. Because the thing about Hollywood in the 1960s is that there were all of these fan magazines, and there were all of these secrets that everyone in Hollywood knew, but no one talked about except for the fan magazines that would allude to them. White director Otto Preminger and his romance with black actress Dorothy Dandridge. All of the innuendo about Rock Hudson. But, it's kind of like Twitter. The snark is there. So that was fascinating to me as I would go through these. And the other thing that astonished me were the travel magazines from East Africa, which had not quite caught up to the civil rights movement. Literally, you're going through travel magazines from 1964 with ads for, and you cannot make this term up, it's so horrible, great white hunters. Literally, that's the term for who's going to guide you on your hunting safari. So that was fascinating to me. And now we're in the pandemic phase. Now I am quarantined in Vermont. And this book saved my life. It quite literally kept me from losing my mind because we canceled the Red Lotus book tour on Friday, May 13th, 2020. And my voice was fine.
I love that at the beginning of each chapter, that those little sort of snippets from the magazines, right, and it gives you that jumping back between the two worlds, and it just increases the drama and the tension as a reader.
Thank you. I also had fun with those because every chapter begins with an excerpt from either the Los Angeles Times or a movie magazine, and this does 2 things. Exactly as Brenda said, it foreshadows a little bit what's going to happen in the chapter. It lets you know a little bit about what's occurring on the continent in terms of the Simba rebellion, and it reminds you who these characters are. It's, you can say to yourself, oh yeah, Reggie Stout, he's Katie Barstow's publicist. Oh yeah, Peter Merrick, he's her agent. Oh, Margie Stepanov, oh yeah, that's the sister-in-law.
And you also learn where they fit in the hierarchy of this glamorous world, and yet here we're all equal when your lives are in danger. This is your 23rd novel, and I imagine each one has changed you in some way. But how did this particular novel and experience change you and advance you just as a storyteller?
Well, it changed me because it is such a big ensemble piece. One of the things that was happening before the pandemic started was I was beginning to write plays. And my wonderful play agent, Amy's in the house tonight. Thank you for being here. And plays are inherently ensemble pieces. Even if it's a one-person play, there's this wonderful ensemble feeling to it between the director and the set designer and the costume designer. And so when I was writing this book, there was a part of me that was also thinking about playwriting, simply because I love the idea of the ensemble nature of the cast. And so the book even begins as if it were a play with a cast of characters, or in this case, the Safari Registry, the Manifest, who are in the Land Rovers.
It's clear that you just love what you do. And as you meet your fans, as you talk to readers, you sort of glow as you talk about your stories and your process. And you've also talked about how much you love getting to see your fans. How does that figure into your process? I know some writers say they're always there kind of on my shoulder, and others say I try not to think about it because I want to write the book that's in my head. How does it work for you as a writer?
Oh, I think about all of you all the time. I literally do, because I don't want to disappoint you. You are here tonight on a Saturday night when it's friggin' gorgeous. And that's important to me. I mean, I get to do what I get to do because of readers, booksellers, librarians, and that's an unbelievable gift. The world is filled with writers who are so much better than I am, and either never got that lucky break, or readers have never discovered them. So, I'm sure I interact with a lot of you, even on the social networks. I'm sure, I've tweeted with some of you, or Instagrammed with some of you, or Facebooked with some of you. I mean, Vicky's here for the third time.
The Lioness, too, as we were saying, so sweeping and engrossing, and it will hopefully make the screen as well. I read something on your website. I know that's a long process and it can be hard to predict what happens, but tell us where that stands.
Yes. The Lioness has been optioned for a TV series, and by the people who've given us some of my very favorite TV shows. I met some of the producers and the showrunners when I was in California about three or 4 weeks ago, and it was just so exciting to talk with them about their enthusiasm for this project.
It must be so thrilling to see this story that started in your head manifest in this big visual way.
It is. I mean, it really is. And when you look at the brilliance of what Kaylee Cuoco, Steve Yockey, HBO Max and Warner did with A Flight Attendant, I was gobsmacked.
It's just so neat to see art come together like that, right? And just everybody being part of it. Oh, God. Well, we're going to do some questions now because we know you've got them. Chris Bohjalian loves talking with his readers. And since this is his 33rd book tour and his 7th trip to St. Louis, he knows many of them by name. And like all good guests, he's also a really good gift giver.
As you know, I always bring the swag. Usually it's T-shirts. We gotta outdo T-shirts. So I brought with me the official Lioness chocolate bar, made by Lake Champlain Chocolates in Vermont. $2 from every bar goes to Fair Trade USA to support women's agriculture in East Africa. So, this is for the gentleman who asked the first question.
Of course, the most important thing that he gives is time, even when it's hard to do so. Despite the obvious strain on his voice, Bohjalian answered every question that was asked and posed for photos before reluctantly saying goodbye.
And no matter what the future holds for all of us in terms of Supreme Court decisions, pandemics, tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, here are three absolutes, that can always make us happy. Books, dogs, and you mentioned it, baseball. Chocolate. Thank you all. Brenda, thank you.